Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked concrete floor of Ligaya Elementary School in General Santos City. Dust particles danced in the golden rays that struggled through broken windows, illuminating a classroom where hope seemed as fragile as the weathered textbooks stacked on makeshift shelves. The scent of chalk and dampness filled the air, mingling with the distant sounds of children playing in the dusty courtyard. Ligaya Mendoza adjusted her faded yellow blouse and smoothed down her long black hair, tied back with a rubber band she had been using for months. At 52, she had dedicated 28 years of her life to teaching in this forgotten corner of Mindanao, where dreams often withered before they could bloom. Her weathered hands, marked by years of writing on chalkboards and correcting papers by candlelight, trembled slightly as she prepared for another day. The wooden chair creaked under her weight as she sat down at her desk, a piece of furniture that had seen better decades. Scattered across its surface were essays from her 6th grade students, written on whatever paper they could find. Notebook pages torn from old compositions, backs of flyers, even pieces of cardboard. Each one represented a small miracle of determination. Children who walked miles through muddy paths just to attend her classes. Outside, the sound of motorcycle engines and jeepneys created the familiar symphony of a city waking up. General Santos City, known as the tuna capital of the Philippines, buzzed with activity as fishermen returned from their early morning catch, and vendors began setting up their stalls. But inside this classroom, time seemed suspended in a bubble of quiet dedication. Ligaya's eyes fell upon a particular essay that made her heart ache. Young Angelo, one of her brightest students, had written about his dream of becoming a doctor. The boy's father worked as a laborer at the fish port, earning barely enough to feed their family of 7. Angelo often came to school without breakfast, his stomach growling during lessons, yet his eagerness to learn never diminished. The morning routine began as students gradually filled the classroom. Their uniforms, mostly hand-me-downs or sewn by mothers working late into the night, told stories of sacrifice and love. Shoes with holes carefully covered by tape, backpacks held together by safety pins. Yet every face carried the unmistakable light of curiosity and hope. Ligaya had witnessed generations of children pass through these doors. Some had managed to escape poverty through education, sending grateful letters from Manila or Cebu, where they had found better opportunities. Others had been forced to drop out, their families unable to afford even the minimal school fees. Each departure felt like a small piece of her heart being carried away. The government promises of better facilities and resources had become hollow echoes over the years. The school still lacked proper computers. The library consisted of donated books from the 1980s, and during rainy season, students had to dodge leaks that turned the floor into a maze of puddles. Yet Ligaya persisted, using her own meager salary to buy supplies and staying after hours to tutor struggling students. As she looked around the classroom, preparing to begin another day of shaping young minds with limited resources but unlimited love, Ligaya had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday morning would soon become extraordinary. In just a few hours, the most famous son of General Santos City would walk through those very doors, carrying with him the power to transform not just her life, but the lives of every child who called this humble school their second home. The morning lesson began with the familiar ritual of reciting the national pledge, 34 young voices echoing through the cramped classroom with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Ligaya watched her students with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to read not just their academic progress, but their emotional states, their hunger levels, and their family circumstances through subtle cues. Mayumi, a thin girl in the front row, kept glancing toward the window where her younger brother waited outside. The family could only afford to send one child to school at a time, so the siblings took turns attending classes while the other worked selling sampaguita flowers at the nearby market. Today was Mayumi's day to learn. Tomorrow would be her brother's turn. The mathematics lesson proceeded despite the absence of proper teaching materials. Ligaya had become a master of improvisation over the decades, using bottle caps as counting tools and drawing geometric shapes with colored chalk she had purchased with her own money. Her voice carried the passion of someone who truly believed that education could break the chains of poverty, even when the system seemed designed to keep those chains firmly in place. As the children worked on their arithmetic problems, scribbling numbers on whatever paper they could find. The distant rumble of construction machinery reminded everyone of the city's ongoing development. New shopping centers and modern buildings were rising in the commercial district, yet schools like theirs remained trapped in time, forgotten by progress and prosperity. During recess, Ligaya walked through the schoolyard where children played games that required no equipment, patintero drawn in the dirt, hopscotch squares marked with stones, and tag games that brought genuine laughter despite their circumstances. The sound of their joy created a stark contrast to the weight of responsibility she carried on her shoulders. The principal, Reynaldo Santos, a weary man in his 60s, approached her with the familiar expression of someone bearing bad news. The school's budget allocation had been delayed again, meaning repairs to the leaking roof would have to wait another month. The science laboratory, which existed only in name since it contained no actual scientific equipment, would remain empty of the promised microscopes and chemistry sets. Ligaya nodded with the resignation of someone who had heard similar announcements countless times. She had learned to find solutions where others saw only problems, to create opportunities where others found only obstacles. Her classroom had become a sanctuary of learning through sheer force of will and creativity. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Doroteo, a former student who had graduated 15 years earlier. Now working as a mechanic in the city center, he had come to thank Ligaya for the foundation she had given him. In his calloused hands, he carried a small envelope containing money he wanted to donate for school supplies. Such visits were rare but precious, reminding Ligaya that her efforts had indeed changed lives, even if recognition never came from official channels. As the school day ended, and children dispersed to their various afternoon responsibilities, some to help in family businesses, others to care for younger siblings, Ligaya remained in her classroom preparing for the next day. The setting sun painted the walls in warm orange hues, transforming the humble space into something almost magical. Unbeknownst to her, across the city, arrangements were being made for a visit that would bring unprecedented attention to their forgotten school. Phone calls were being exchanged between offices in Manila and local government officials. Security protocols were being discussed, and media crews were being alerted to a special event planned for the following day. In her quiet classroom, surrounded by the dreams and aspirations of her students, Ligaya continued her evening routine of grading papers and planning lessons, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever. The evening air in General Santos City carried the familiar blend of salt from the nearby sea and the earthy scent of the fish markets closing for the day. As Ligaya finally locked the classroom door with the old brass key that had served the school for over a decade, she remained unaware of the unusual activity beginning to stir throughout the city. At the municipal building, city officials gathered around a conference table covered with security protocols and event logistics. The mayor's office had received a call that afternoon from Manila, one that would require careful coordination and absolute discretion. A visit of this magnitude had never occurred in the history of their small educational district, and the weight of responsibility hung heavy in the air-conditioned room where plans were being meticulously crafted. Meanwhile, Ligaya walked her usual route home through the narrow streets lined with sari-sari stores and small eateries. Children waved from doorways where families gathered for their evening meals, the warm glow of fluorescent lights spilling onto cracked sidewalks. She stopped at Aling Rosa's store to buy rice for dinner, counting her pesos carefully, as she had done every day for the past 3 decades. The store owner, a woman whose weathered face reflected years of serving the community, mentioned hearing unusual conversations among her customers throughout the day. Government vehicles had been spotted near the school district office, and several teachers from other schools had received mysterious calls about special preparations for the following week. The rumors spread through the neighborhood like ripples in still water, each retelling adding new layers of speculation. Back at her modest apartment, Ligaya prepared a simple meal of rice, dried fish and vegetables while reviewing her lesson plans by the light of a single bulb. Her small living space reflected her priorities, walls lined with certificates of appreciation from various school programs, photographs of graduating classes spanning decades, and shelves filled with teaching materials she had accumulated over the years. The landline telephone, a luxury she had only recently been able to afford, remained silent on her small dining table. She had no way of knowing that across the city, phones were ringing in government offices, media outlets, and security agencies. A coordination meeting had been scheduled for early morning, involving personnel who typically handled only the most significant public events. As night fell over General Santos City, the urban landscape transformed into a constellation of flickering lights. In the distance, the port area buzzed with its nocturnal rhythm of fishing boats preparing for their midnight departures. The sound of tricycles and motorcycles gradually diminished as families settled into their evening routines. In the modest homes surrounding Ligaya Elementary School, parents helped their children with homework under dim lighting, often struggling with subjects they had never had the opportunity to study themselves. Many of these parents had worked multiple jobs to ensure their children could attend school, sacrificing their own comfort for the possibility of a better future for the next generation. Benedicto, a construction worker whose daughter attended Ligaya's class, sat on his front steps reviewing his child's mathematics homework. Despite his limited formal education, he possessed an intuitive understanding of numbers gained through years of measuring construction materials and calculating wages. His calloused fingers traced the pencil marks on his daughter's paper, pride evident in his careful examination of each solved problem. 3 blocks away, Celestina, a laundrywoman whose son Angelo harbored dreams of becoming a doctor, hung clothes on a makeshift line strung between 2 posts in her small backyard. The weight of wet fabric on the thin rope mirrored the weight of responsibility she carried, knowing that her son's future depended on opportunities that seemed increasingly distant, yet persistently hoped for. The night security guard at the school district office noticed an unusual number of late-night calls and visitors, but his position required discretion rather than curiosity. Documents were being prepared, schedules were being cleared, and resources were being allocated for an event that would require unprecedented coordination. As Ligaya drifted off to sleep in her small bedroom, the city around her hummed with quiet preparation for something extraordinary. Government officials worked late into the night, ensuring every detail would be perfect for a visit that would bring international attention to their humble corner of Mindanao. The stage was being set for a moment that would transform not just one teacher's life, but the educational landscape of an entire community. Dawn broke over General Santos City with an unusual energy that seemed to pulse through the humid morning air. The typical sounds of roosters crowing and early morning vendors calling out their wares were punctuated by something different, the distant hum of activity that suggested this day would be unlike any other in the recent memory of the community. Ligaya woke to the familiar routine she had maintained for nearly 3 decades. Her small alarm clock, its brass numbers faded from years of faithful service, announced 6 o'clock with its persistent ringing. She rose from her narrow bed, performed her morning prayers, and prepared for another day of teaching with the same dedication that had defined her career. As she walked through the quiet streets towards school, Ligaya noticed subtle changes that puzzled her. Several government vehicles were parked near the district office, their tinted windows reflecting the early morning sunlight. Workers in crisp uniforms were setting up what appeared to be additional security barriers around the school complex, their movements precise and purposeful. The school janitor, Florencio, had arrived earlier than usual and was meticulously cleaning areas that rarely received such attention. The front entrance gleamed under his careful ministrations, and fresh flowers had been placed in containers that normally sat empty. His weathered face showed a mixture of confusion and excitement as he worked with unusual intensity. Inside the classroom, Ligaya began her morning preparations with characteristic thoroughness. She arranged the mismatched chairs in perfect rows, cleaned the ancient chalkboard until it showed no trace of previous lessons, and organized her teaching materials with extra care. Something in the atmosphere suggested that today required special attention to detail, though she couldn't articulate why. The first students began arriving earlier than usual, their curiosity piqued by the unusual activity around the school grounds. Young Angelo carried his worn backpack with an extra spring in his step, sensing the anticipation that seemed to permeate the air. Mayumi and her brother both appeared at the gate together, their family having decided that whatever was happening warranted both children's presence. Principal Reynaldo moved through the hallways with nervous energy, checking and rechecking arrangements that had been finalized in the early morning hours. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by an alertness that suggested he was preparing for something monumentally important. He carried a folder of documents that he consulted repeatedly, his hands trembling slightly, with what could have been excitement or anxiety. Throughout the neighborhood, parents were taking unusual interest in their children's school attendance. Mothers who typically sent their children off with hurried goodbyes lingered at their doorways, watching the school grounds with curious eyes. Fathers who normally left for work before dawn delayed their departures, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The local radio station had begun playing more music than usual, interrupting their regular programming with mysterious announcements about a special event that would bring pride to the entire region. The disc jockey's voice carried an excitement that was infectious, spreading through the community like wildfire, despite the lack of specific details. At the nearby market, vendors discussed the increased security presence and the arrival of several vehicles bearing Manila license plates. Speculation ran wild among the early morning shoppers, with theories ranging from a political visit to a television production. The one constant in all the conversations was the acknowledgement that whatever was happening, it was unprecedented for their humble corner of Mindanao. As the morning progressed and the school filled with students displaying unusual excitement, Ligaya maintained her focus on the day's lessons. She had learned long ago that consistency in education was more valuable than getting caught up in external distractions, regardless of how intriguing they might appear. Yet even she could not ignore the growing sense that this ordinary Tuesday was about to become anything but ordinary. The morning sun climbed higher over General Santos City as whispers began to transform into certainty throughout the community. What had started as vague speculation was crystallizing into an extraordinary reality that would forever change the trajectory of Ligaya Elementary School. At exactly 9:30, a convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows rolled through the narrow streets leading to the school district. The vehicles moved with the measured pace of an official procession, their presence commanding attention from every corner of the neighborhood. Children pressed their faces against classroom windows, while teachers struggled to maintain focus on their lessons. Ligaya noticed the commotion, but remained committed to her mathematics lesson, helping young Teodoro understand basic multiplication while the sounds of increased activity filtered through the thin walls. Her dedication to her students had always superseded external distractions, a principle that had guided her through decades of challenges and changes in the educational system. The school's main gate, which typically remained open throughout the day, was now flanked by security personnel whose professional demeanor suggested they were accustomed to protecting individuals of significant importance. Their earpieces crackled with periodic communications as they coordinated movements with military precision. Word began spreading through the student body with the rapid efficiency that only children possess. Angelo abandoned his usual composure, his eyes wide with disbelief as older students whispered about the identity of their mysterious visitor. The boy who dreamed of becoming a doctor was about to meet someone whose own journey from poverty to international stardom would make those dreams seem far more achievable. In the faculty room, teachers gathered around the small television set that usually played morning news programs. The local station had interrupted regular programming to announce that the Philippines' most beloved boxing champion was making an unscheduled visit to his hometown's educational institutions. The anchor's voice carried barely contained excitement as she described the significance of this unprecedented event. Principal Reynaldo received final instructions through his mobile phone, his hands shaking as he realized the magnitude of what was about to unfold within his humble school's walls. 28 years of managing a forgotten institution had not prepared him for hosting the most famous athlete in Philippine history, yet somehow that was exactly what was about to happen. The entire neighborhood had transformed into an impromptu celebration. Parents abandoned their morning routines to gather along the streets, many carrying small Philippine flags and handmade signs expressing their admiration for their hometown hero. Vendors quickly set up stalls selling snacks and drinks to the growing crowd, turning the educational visit into a community festival. At exactly 10 o'clock, the convoy stopped directly in front of Ligaya Elementary School. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a figure emerged that was instantly recognizable despite the simple clothing and modest demeanor. Manny Pacquiao stepped onto the cracked concrete pathway that led to the school's main entrance, his presence immediately electrifying the atmosphere. The 8-time world boxing champion moved with the humble confidence that had endeared him to millions of fans worldwide. His security detail maintained a respectful distance as he approached the school building, allowing the gathered students and community members to witness this historic moment without excessive barriers. Inside her classroom, Ligaya continued teaching, unaware that the most successful athlete in Philippine history was walking through the hallways of her school. The sounds of excitement grew louder outside her door, but her commitment to education remained unwavering, even as the extraordinary was about to intersect with the ordinary in ways that would reshape everything she thought she knew about recognition and impact. The moment that would change her life was now just steps away, approaching through corridors that had never hosted anyone more famous than the occasional district supervisor. The wooden door of classroom 3B creaked open with the same familiar sound that had marked the beginning and end of countless lessons over the years. Ligaya glanced up from the multiplication problems she was explaining to her students, expecting to see Principal Reynaldo or perhaps another teacher with a routine message. Instead, framed in the doorway stood a figure that caused time itself to seem suspended. Manny Pacquiao, the pride of the Philippines, stepped quietly into the humble classroom with the same respectful demeanor he had shown entering churches and meeting world leaders. His presence filled the small space with an energy that was both electric and profoundly peaceful. The chalk in Ligaya's hand froze midway through writing the number 7 on the blackboard. Her mind struggled to process the impossibility of what her eyes were seeing. The man who had brought glory to their nation on the world's biggest stages was standing in her classroom, surrounded by the same cracked walls and makeshift furniture that had defined her teaching career for nearly 3 decades. Angelo's jaw dropped as he recognized the champion who had inspired his dreams of greatness despite humble beginnings. The boy's pencil rolled off his desk and clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. Mayumi clutched her notebook to her chest, her eyes wide with wonder, as she realized she was in the presence of someone she had only seen on television screens in neighbors' homes. The boxing legend moved with the same grace that had made him unstoppable in the ring, but here his movements carried a different kind of power, the quiet strength of someone returning to honor the foundations that had shaped him. His eyes swept across the classroom, taking in every detail of the educational environment that mirrored his own childhood experiences with poverty and limited resources. Ligaya's heart pounded with such intensity, she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Her simple yellow blouse and worn skirt suddenly felt inadequate for meeting someone of such international stature. Yet Manny's warm smile immediately put her at ease. His expression conveyed not judgment, but recognition, the understanding of one person who had struggled against difficult circumstances, acknowledging another who had done the same. The students sat in stunned silence, their usual classroom chatter replaced by an awe so profound it seemed to change the very air they were breathing. Young Teodoro, who had been struggling with his multiplication just moments before, stared at the champion with the realization that dreams could indeed become reality. Behind Manny, a small entourage of officials and media representatives remained respectfully in the hallway, understanding that this moment belonged to the classroom and its inhabitants. The boxer had specifically requested privacy for his interaction with the teacher and students, wanting to ensure the encounter felt personal rather than performative. Ligaya's legs trembled as she slowly placed the chalk on her desk. 28 years of teaching had prepared her for many challenges, but nothing could have readied her for this moment when the most famous person in the Philippines chose to visit her forgotten classroom. Her mind raced with questions about why he was there and what this could possibly mean for her students. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the broken windows seemed to intensify, casting a golden glow that transformed the humble space into something almost sacred. The sounds from outside, the excited crowd, the media preparations, the general commotion, faded into a distant hum as the classroom became a world unto itself. In that suspended moment, before words were exchanged or explanations given, Ligaya understood that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The recognition she had never expected was standing right in front of her, embodied by someone who understood better than anyone the power of education to transform lives. Manny Pacquiao moved deeper into the classroom, with the reverent steps of someone entering a sacred space. His eyes methodically absorbed every detail: the carefully arranged, mismatched furniture, the textbooks held together with tape, the mathematical equations written in chalk that would have to be erased to make room for tomorrow's lessons due to the lack of proper writing materials. The champion's gaze lingered on the student artwork taped to the walls, colorful drawings created with crayons that had been shared among dozens of children until they were worn down to tiny stubs. Each piece of art represented hours of creativity flourishing despite material limitations, imagination thriving in conditions that would have discouraged lesser spirits. Ligaya watched in fascination as this global icon examined her classroom with the intensity of someone conducting a thorough inspection. His face reflected a complex mixture of emotions: recognition, admiration, and what appeared to be a deep, personal understanding of the challenges she faced daily. The way he studied the improvised teaching materials suggested he was seeing his own childhood reflected in these humble surroundings. The students remained frozen in their seats, afraid that any movement might shatter what felt like a dream. Angelo's essay about becoming a doctor lay open on his desk, and when Manny's eyes fell upon it, the boy's heart nearly stopped beating. The champion read the handwritten words with obvious interest, his expression growing more thoughtful with each sentence. Behind the boxer, Principal Ronaldo appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with nervous excitement. He carried a folder containing documentation of the school's needs, budget constraints, and the various challenges they faced in providing quality education with minimal resources. The principal had prepared this information, hoping for an opportunity that had seemed impossible until this very moment. Manny's attention turned to the corner where Ligaya kept her personal teaching supplies, materials she had purchased with her own salary because the school's budget could not cover basic necessities, pencils organized in small containers, notebooks she bought in bulk to distribute to students who couldn't afford them, and reference books she had acquired over decades of careful saving. The boxing legend's hands, which had delivered some of the most powerful punches in sports history, gently touched the surface of Ligaya's desk. The wooden furniture bore the marks of countless hours spent grading papers, preparing lessons, and providing individual attention to students who needed extra help. Every scratch and stain told a story of dedication that extended far beyond normal working hours. Young Mayumi clutched her brother's hand as they witnessed something extraordinary unfolding before their eyes. The champion who had brought pride to their nation was taking time to understand their daily reality, showing genuine interest in their educational environment rather than simply making a ceremonial appearance. Ligaya felt tears forming in her eyes as she observed Manny's careful examination of her life's work. For the first time in her career, someone of influence was witnessing the conditions under which she had been teaching for nearly 3 decades. The isolation she had felt, the sense that her efforts went unnoticed by those with the power to create change, began to dissolve in the presence of someone who clearly understood the value of what she was doing. The classroom, which had felt cramped and inadequate just minutes earlier, now seemed filled with possibility. Manny's presence had transformed the space into something significant, a place where important conversations about education and opportunity could begin. His respectful attention to every detail validated years of hard work that had often felt invisible to the outside world. As the champion continued his thoughtful survey of the classroom, Ligaya sensed that this moment was building towards something greater than a simple visit. The way he studied everything suggested he was formulating plans that could extend far beyond this single encounter. 3 months later, the morning sun illuminated a scene that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had known the old Ligaya Elementary School, where cracked windows once struggled to let in light. New glass panels now sparkled with clarity. The broken concrete floors had been replaced with polished tiles that reflected the bright fluorescent lighting installed throughout the building. Ligaya stood in the doorway of her transformed classroom, still unable to fully believe the magnitude of change that had occurred since that extraordinary Tuesday morning. Brand new desks arranged in perfect rows replaced the mismatched furniture that had served for decades. Each student now had their own set of textbooks, notebooks, and writing supplies, luxuries that had once seemed as distant as the stars. The walls displayed the same student artwork, but now it was properly framed and mounted with professional care. A new interactive whiteboard had replaced the ancient chalkboard, and shelves lined with current educational materials created an environment that rivaled the best schools in Manila. The transformation extended far beyond mere aesthetics. It represented a fundamental shift in what was possible for education in their community. Angelo sat at his new desk, working on advanced mathematics problems from textbooks that had arrived just weeks earlier. His dream of becoming a doctor no longer seemed like an impossible fantasy, but rather an achievable goal supported by the quality education he was now receiving. The scholarship fund that had been established would ensure that financial barriers would never force him to abandon his studies. Mayumi and her brother now attended school together every day, their family's financial burden lifted by the comprehensive support program that provided not only educational materials, but also nutritional assistance and healthcare services. The girl who once had to choose between learning and helping her family could now pursue both without compromise. The computer laboratory that had existed only in imagination was now a fully equipped facility where students learned digital skills that would prepare them for opportunities in the modern economy. The science laboratory contained actual microscopes, chemistry sets, and experimental materials that brought textbook concepts to life through hands-on exploration. Principal Rinaldo moved through the hallways with renewed energy, no longer burdened by the constant worry of insufficient resources. The comprehensive renovation had included administrative offices, a proper library with thousands of new books, and teacher facilities that attracted qualified educators from across the region. The school had become a model institution that other communities hoped to emulate. Most remarkably, Ligaya found herself at the center of an educational foundation that bore her name. The recognition she had never expected came in the form of international attention to her decades of dedicated service under impossible conditions. Educational conferences invited her to speak about perseverance and innovation in teaching, and her methods were being studied by institutions around the world. The teacher, who had purchased supplies with her own meager salary, now oversaw a budget that ensured no student would ever lack for educational materials. The woman who had taught in isolation now collaborated with educators from prestigious universities who sought to learn from her experiences and expertise. Yet perhaps the most profound change was the hope that now permeated every aspect of the school environment. Students arrived each morning with the confidence that their dreams were achievable. Parents participated actively in their children's education, and the entire community had been transformed by the understanding that education was indeed the pathway to a better future. As Ligaya watched her students engage with learning opportunities that had once seemed impossible, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. The recognition she had never sought had arrived in the most extraordinary way, carried by someone who understood that true champions are not only found in boxing rings, but also in classrooms, where dedicated teachers change lives one student at a time. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.